Today, we're going to talk about how to fix your sleep schedule. So the biggest mistake that we tend to make when we are trying to fix our sleep schedule is we focus on going to bed, right? We have all these things like sleep hygiene, like make sure you do meditation for 30 minutes and go for a walk and don't eat something super heavy and avoid cell phones because they have blue light and something about the pineal gland and melatonin. We focus on all this stuff at night. But that's the biggest mistake. If you want to fix your sleep schedule, what you need to do is fix your waking hours. So what is the purpose of sleep, right? Why do human beings sleep? If we look at some animals like whales or dolphins, they'll sleep for 5 to 20 minutes several times throughout the day, and they're active in between. So the human brain sleeps for about 8 hours a night to compensate or complement our waking activity. And the biggest problem in the world today is that our waking hours have changed. So the biological signals that trigger sleep have now become impaired. So as we understand why the brain needs to sleep in the first place, we can start to institute those things during the day and then end up making going to sleep actually incredibly easy. And I say this as a psychiatrist who's worked with tons of patients. About 90% of my patients end up sleeping very, very easily after working together for a few months and do so without medication. I'll have many patients that come to my office and say, Doc, I'm having trouble sleeping. Like, can you prescribe something? And we can prescribe stuff that's totally okay. I'm not against prescriptions for sleep, but the goal is that you can take those temporarily, but over time, we want to build a life where you're engaging your body in all of the right ways so that your sleep signals are at their maximum when you try to go to bed. When people hear that we offer coaching at HG, their first question is like, what on earth even is that? So here's the basic problem. When you struggle with something in your life, you don't see the problem from the outside. You see it from the inside. The value of a coach is that they can look at your life from the outside. They can understand what's going on, and they can help guide you to improve things like motivation, accomplish short-term goals, and even increase a sense of purpose in life. And over the long term, we also see improvements in feelings of depression and anxiety. And the best part is we've had over 100,000 coaching sessions, and we incorporate that feedback to continually improve our program. So if y'all are interested in actually making a change in your life, check out the link in the description below. So let's start with the first thing that really confuses a lot of people. You have a window to go to sleep. And if you miss that window, it becomes increasingly difficult to go to sleep. Some people will say, if I wake up by this time, then I'm okay. But if I sleep too long, then I'm groggy. Or if I wake up too early, then I'm groggy. Most of us have, or all of us have this thing called a circadian rhythm, which dictates when it is easiest to wake up and when it is easiest to go to sleep. And if we miss that window, it becomes increasingly difficult. So the first thing is, as we are awake throughout the day, we accumulate this chemical called adenosine in our brain. And this sort of signals to us the degree of fatigue we have, and then this sort of makes us want to go to sleep. So throughout the day, this is just simplification, but we can say that the fatigue signals in the brain slowly increase over time. Then what happens is we have this other part of our brain called the frontal lobes. So the frontal lobes are the parts of our brain that restrain impulses and control our behavior. You can kind of think about them as willpower. And remember that your frontal lobes are getting exhausted throughout the day as well. So there is a very specific window where the fatigue signals in the brain are high and your frontal lobes have enough willpower. There's enough gas in the tank to restrain your impulses. So this isn't that the frontal lobes have reached complete exhaustion, but there's this window where you feel tired and your brain has enough willpower to where it can restrain your impulses like binge eating or hopping on your cell phone or watching something on TV or getting up and doing whatever, right? So you have to be able to restrain impulses to go to sleep. And if we look at people who really struggle with sleep, what ends up happening? You get into bed and then you're kind of really tired and then you hop on your cell phone, right? Because you can't really restrain that. And then an hour goes by, an hour and a half goes by, you feel really sleepy, and then you kind of jump to something else or you try to put it away and then you pick it up again 5 minutes later. So if we really look at what goes on with people who struggle with sleep, they have an impulse control problem. They cannot restrain their impulses. They cannot just sit in bed and wait to fall asleep, right? You have to pick something up. And technology has something to do with that, absolutely. But the main issue is that we are missing this window where our brains are fatigued enough to go to bed and not so fatigued that they can't restrain impulses. So for most people, this window is somewhere between 1 and 2 hours. It's this really sweet spot. What time of the day it happens, we'll kind of get to a little bit later, but it probably happens if you wake up around 8 o'clock. It probably happens somewhere between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m. That's your optimal sleep window. If you stay up past that window, you will not have the willpower reserve to restrain your impulses and continue procrastinating going to bed. Now, why is this becoming an increasing problem? So researchers have recently discovered that there are 2 types of sleep procrastination. There is procrastination of going to bed. Okay, so this is like, I'm not ready to get into bed yet. And what they've actually discovered is that there is a second kind of procrastination, which is while in bed procrastination. This is a completely new thing. So if we look at the science of it, what we find is that human beings, I guess since the dawn of time, procrastinated on going to bed. And this procrastination was somewhere between 30 and 75 minutes. And since the advent of things like cell phones and easy access to devices, what we've discovered is that there is a second level of procrastination. So you procrastinate getting into bed by about 30 to 75 minutes. That's fair enough. But then once you are in bed, there is within bed procrastination, which is another 30 to 75 minutes. And the key thing about adding this second layer of procrastination is it puts us outside of that fatigue and impulse control window, that really nice sweet spot, which then means that we can't really control what we're doing and we stay up way too long. So the first thing to do if you want to fix your sleep schedule is really try to target that window and recognize that if you pick up your cell phone, you shouldn't take your cell phone to bed. That's a very practical tip, which we'll get to at the end. But if you miss that window, it's not just, I'm going to stay on the phone for an additional 15 minutes or 30 minutes. It's not 15 or 30 minutes. It's actually going to cost you way more. It's kind of like missing your flight, right? Like you don't want to delay. If you delay a little bit too long and you miss your flight, you miss the window and then you're in a lot of trouble. This is the first principle that I teach my patients that really, really helps them develop a solid sleep schedule over time. The second thing that we're going to talk about is emotional flooding. So if we look at the overall effect of technology, there is one uniform thing that basically all technological devices do. This can be social media, this can be browsing Reddit, this can be watching things on YouTube, watching things on TikTok Shorts, whatever. It doesn't matter. They all do one thing, they share one thing in common, which is that they suppress our negative emotional circuitry, right? So if you're feeling bad, it doesn't matter what you can do. You can binge watch a show, you can play a video game, you can watch some porn, you can browse some social media, look at some Twitter trolls, like whatever. All of these things have one shared effect, which is that they suppress your negative emotional circuitry. Now, a lot of times people think, okay, if I'm suppressing my negative emotional circuitry, does that mean that the emotions go away? No, this is suppression, right? It is not elimination of emotions. It is suppression of emotions. So there's a very common thing that I'm beginning to see now, and I experienced this when I was struggling with video game addiction, where you suppress these negative emotional circuits throughout the day. And so the moment that you put your devices away, there's this experience of emotional flooding. The moment that you put your device away, right, because you're like supposed to not watch your device in bed, stay away from your device, so you put it away and what happens? A flood of thoughts tend to come forward. You start to have anxieties, you start to have regrets, you start to be depressed about tomorrow, you beat yourself up, right? So even if we look at the emotional experience of trying to go to bed, you're frustrated with yourself. Why do I keep on doing this? This is such a waste of time. What is that? That's emotional energy. And so basically what's going on is throughout the day, what human beings used to do is process their emotions. If you look at the situations in which our brains evolved, they tended to involve a lot of rote mechanical tasks. We're doing stuff like churning butter or like plowing a field with an oxen. And when you're sitting on a cart and you're like kind of whipping the oxen, you're not whipping it too hard. It's kind of just trundling along the road. Like, what's your mind doing? Your mind is just processing all these emotions. Like human beings used to be so bored. And so when the mind has idle time, when the mind is not occupied by something, what it does is it starts cleaning out the trash, right? The mind is on empty. It's not focusing on anything. Now what's going on in our society is that we have so much sensory stimulus. Our mind is so engaged in laughing at this or looking at a cat video or getting pissed off by political beliefs that we don't like. Whatever the situation is, we don't have time to process our minor emotional things throughout the day. And so then when we go to bed, our mind finally has empty time. And what does it have to do? Process all of these emotions that have built up. So this is the experience of emotional flooding. So then what happens is people get so overwhelmed or activated by this emotional flooding that they have to distract themselves from it, right? You feel overwhelmed, and what's your solution? Pick up a device, because that quiets all the emotions down. So then we get stuck in this ping pong between overwhelming emotions and distracting ourselves from our emotions, because the overwhelming emotions aren't going to let us sleep, right? And you really need to go to sleep. And the more you stress yourself out, the harder it is to sleep. So you ping pong between these two things until you reach the point of absolute exhaustion. So now it's super late, and the fatigue signals in your brain are so powerful that you finally pass out. But this is not how you fix your sleep schedule, right? This is what destroys your sleep schedule. So what do we do about emotional flooding? Give yourself time during the day to be bored and let your mind take out the trash. So I recommend an hour-long walk. Don't listen to anything, no music, no podcasts, anything like that. And your mind, all these things will start to come up. You can absolutely do things like meditation, and particularly like parasympathetic meditations are very good. We explain this stuff in Dr. K's Guide to Meditation and things like that. We've explained that all over the place. You can absolutely meditate, but all you really have to do is give your mind space, okay? As you give your mind space, you will process some of those emotions automatically. You can also do things like journaling, meditation, etc. You can do focused emotional practices, or you can just give yourself some time. And the more that you manage these emotions, the less flooding will happen, and the more calm your mind will be when you go to bed. If your mind is calm, then you can pick a time and the mind will naturally sleep. The third thing that we're going to talk about is how you spend your waking hours. In particular, what we want to do is try to work ideally early in the morning. So the more work we get done during the day, the easier it will be to sleep. So let's understand why this is. So the first thing is, what is the biological need for sleep? Sleep is to compensate for work, right? So if you look at like mammals, why do mammals sleep? Because mammals are, generally speaking, engaged in some degree of work throughout several hours of the day. And so we have such an evolved brain that we keep track of this. So I want y'all to really pay attention to this. I know it's going to be kind of a stretch, but it's really important to understand. So our brain keeps track of all of the work that we have to do. This is how our brain reminds you, right? So let's say you spend a couple hours like watching Netflix or whatever, and then when it's over, your brain sends you a signal, hey, we have a test to study for, or I forgot, I need to stop by the grocery store. So if you think about this very simple concept of how does the brain remember to remind you that you need to do things? Well, very simple. In order for that to be done, it must keep track of all of the things that you have to do. And since it's keeping track of all of the things that you have to do, this creates a very big problem for sleep. So we're going to explain this a little bit further. So let's take the example of procrastinating for an exam. So you've got 2 weeks to study for an exam, and you kind of procrastinate up until the point of about like 3 days. But the question is, why 3 days? Why not 5 days? Why not 2 days? Why not a day and a half? How is it that your brain decides to really induce that last minute panic so that you start studying 3 days before an exam, right? And if you pay attention, it's quite precise. It's like we can procrastinate today, tomorrow, the next day, 1 week, a week and a half, and then once 3 days rolls around, once some amount of time rolls around, suddenly our brain is like, no more procrastination. We're done. Last minute panic. Let's go. So think about that for a second. How does the brain know how to do that? And if you start studying like a madman 3 days before a test, you'll get like a B- or a C. You'll pass the exam, right? So what that means is our brain actually keeps track of all of the tasks that we need to do. And when we start to move forward in our tasks, our brain keeps track of that as well. And if we have procrastinated all day long and we have not done enough work, our brain does not let us sleep, because our brain basically allots a certain amount of work that we have to get done every day. You have all of these different tasks that need to be done. And so your brain knows, okay, like we need to do at least this amount to not fall further behind. It keeps track of all of this stuff. So what we really want to do to be able to sleep at night is, if we procrastinated, if we haven't done enough work, our brain will say, we have not done our allotted work for the day. This is actually not sufficient. And then it will actually keep us awake. Stress signals, which we'll get to in more detail, will start to activate. So these are hormones like cortisol. And literally what cortisol does is it goes to the part of your brain that lets you fall asleep, and it says, hey, we're not done with our work for the day. And you know this, right? Because if your sleep schedule is messed up, when you try to go to bed, your brain will remind you of all of the things that you should have done. This is the literal experience of 90% of my patients. And so how do we fix this? It is very simple. We have to remove that cortisol signal. We have to remove the cortisol signal by doing some kind of work. The more work you do, the more it tells your brain is keeping track of it. And it's not about whether it's enough or it's good enough or anything like that. You just need to do some kind of work, and we'll talk about why that is as well. But basically, the more work that you do, the better off you will be at going to sleep, because now your brain doesn't release that cortisol. It says, okay, I got a lot done today. I feel good about this, and so it's okay. There may be a part of your brain that says it's not enough, but that part of your brain is independent from the part of your brain that keeps track that you've done something. And once again, what is the biological purpose for sleep? It is to help us rest and recover from work. So if you do some amount of work during the day, it will help you sleep at night. Now, some people may say, but Dr. K, even if I do some work, like let's say I take out the trash and I do this or that doesn't really solve my problems. And this is the beautiful thing. The architecture that helps you sleep does not relate to actually solving your problems. It can involve even doing things that are completely meaningless as long as they involve some kind of work. Now, this may sound super confusing, but I'll give you all an example. You can even do meaningless work. You don't have to progress towards your goals. It's crazy. You just need to do some kind of work. So let's understand how this works. So if you look at patients who have cancer, one thing that happens is their family members will bring them lots of food. Now, this is in a sense kind of silly because first of all, they're getting IV nutrition, they're on chemotherapy, the intestinal lining is sloughing off. They can't even eat anything. They feel nauseous all the time. And family brings food, family brings food, family brings food. This also happens after someone passes away, right? So I'm kind of making light of this, but this is kind of silly. So sorry about that. I don't mean to be mean, but if you look at a funeral, the one thing that there is no shortage of at a funeral is lots of food. Everyone's bringing food. Everyone's bringing food. Everyone's bringing food. Look, the person is dead, right? They're not going to need to eat anything, and the family's not feeling very hungry. It's beautiful that you want to bring some food, and it's great. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but let's understand the psychology of it. Why does someone bring food to a funeral? It's because they feel like they want to do something. So if we look at the human brain, what we find is that taking meaningless action is sufficient at reducing our cortisol level. So this is a concept that we go into in a lot more detail when we talk about overcoming anxiety by engaging in more active challenges. So there are studies that show that if you are feeling overwhelmed in life, in order to feel less overwhelmed, you can actually take on more work. So if you take on 3 additional tasks, now you have 13 total things to do. And a lot of people may think, if I have 13 things, then I will feel more overwhelmed because 13 is more than 10. But the science shows us that feeling overwhelmed is not about the total number of tasks that you do. It is about the number of tasks that you choose compared to the number of tasks that you have to deal with. So the ratio of things that you want to work on versus things that you have to work on is literally what leads to feeling overwhelmed. The more that we take on, the less overwhelmed we feel. And we see this principle once again in sleep. Because as you are feeling stressed out, if you work on anything, our brain is keeping track of this and sort of says, okay, we've done some stuff today, so now we can go to sleep. So another goal in sleep is anabolism. So anabolism is building your tissues. So if we look at kids grow during sleep. If we look at things like muscle repair happens during sleep. Our body builds tissue when we sleep. So on the converse side, the other way we can look at it is that if we need to build tissues, then we will sleep more. So children who are going through growth spurts need to sleep more. When you start working out and exercising, you need to sleep more. So let's think about what's going on there. So as you exercise and as you create small tears in your muscle fibers, literally these muscle fibers will send signals, inflammatory signals to your brain. Growth factors will start to activate within your brain. These are things like, insulin-derived growth factor, insulin-like growth factor. So all of these kinds of growth factors will start to send signals to your brain that will then make you feel sleepy. So one of the best things that you can do to fall asleep is actually exercise. Now, this is not to get your beach bod or anything like that. This is about physiologically creating the signals that will travel to your brain and help you sleep. So we absolutely want to exercise, and ideally weightlifting, because weightlifting sends signals to your bones and to your muscles. You'll get some muscle tear, so you really want to feel that burn in a healthy way. We don't want to create, a tendon tear or anything like that. And all of these things will send sleep signals to your brain, make it easy for you to sleep at night. The second thing that we're going to talk about is learning new stuff. So the other thing that our brain does when we sleep is consolidates memory. So we take our short-term memory, which lives in the hippocampus, and it kind of gets consolidated into other parts of the hippocampus, into long-term memory. So the more that you are learning, the more sleep signals your brain will be receiving. So as you store a bunch of stuff in your short-term memory, our brain says, holy crap, we have to encode all of this stuff from our RAM into our hard drive, and that requires sleep. So what you will find is people who are engaged in cognitively intensive tasks where they are learning, like learning new things, learning new languages, it will be easier for them to sleep because the brain is sending signals to your reticular activating system. Hey, we need sleep. Hey, we need sleep. Hey, we need sleep. So this is different from just spending cognitive energy. So if I'm playing the same fucking video game over and over and over again, and I'm not learning anything, I'm not rising in rank, right? I'm not watching replays, I'm not focused on learning something, then I'm not going to be able to sleep. It is specifically learning that triggers things like brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which will also help us sleep. So we want to send all of these kind of signals to our brain to help us sleep. Next thing that we're going to talk about is diet. So a big problem that people have when it comes to sleep is what they actually eat. So this is where what we really want to do is be careful about what we eat. So here's one pattern that's a huge problem that interferes with sleep. I wake up, I have a cup of coffee. Coffee is an appetite suppressant, so I don't eat a whole lot. And then 3 p.m. rolls around, I have one big meal. And then dinner time rolls around and I don't feel very hungry, so I don't eat very much. And then even though I had one big meal and it was kind of unhealthy, now my body and brain are kind of confused because I may actually be at a caloric deficit or a nutrient deficit for the day, which means that my brain and my body are not satisfied. I can't actually go to sleep because I have a caloric deficit or nutrient deficit. Both of these things will keep me awake and lead to nighttime snacking. Because some measurement capability in our brain is keeping track of the number of meals we've had, the number of calories we've had, the number of nutrients we've had. And if we're deficient in some way, it won't let us sleep and it'll keep us awake until we eat something again. Instead, what we really want to do is make sure you eat throughout the day as much as possible. So we want to have 2 to 3 meals a day. And this is the last thing, is that before you go to bed, our dinner should actually be quite heavy and can have a fair load of carbohydrates. So what we really want is a carb-heavy meal, but that also has protein and fiber. And there's a couple reasons for this. Why do we want a carb-heavy meal? So we want a carb-heavy meal because this stimulates insulin, and insulin makes us sleepy. We want to induce a food coma at night. Now, if we eat a highly processed meal before bed, we will get a big insulin spike, followed by a blood sugar crash. And so even if you eat a ton of calories with no fiber, so you can eat like a 2,000 calorie meal, and you will still actually feel hungry within a few hours if there is insufficient protein and insufficient fiber. The reason that we want to add fiber and protein to our heavy carb meal is it slows down the release of carbohydrate into our system because our body has to digest all this other stuff. It dilutes out the carbohydrate. As we dilute out the carbohydrate, we slowly absorb carbohydrate, which slowly keeps our insulin levels high, which keeps us sleepy for a sustained period of time, which allows us to actually fall asleep. So if you want to have a big bowl of pasta with a salad and some kind of grilled chicken or fish or something like that, that is an ideal meal before you go to sleep. You can also do something like have a burrito. We don't want to go too carb heavy on the burrito. Make sure there's plenty of protein in there, plenty of vegetables. You can eat all kinds of good stuff, plenty of salsa, and you're totally golden. Lettuce, tomato, whatever you want in there is totally good. So we actually want to eat a heavy meal before we go to bed. That will help us induce sleep. The last thing that we want to consider is that stress in and of itself will keep us awake. Now, this is a huge problem today because our society is so full of stress. So it used to be that stresses were acute things, right? So I'm like hunting in the jungle and I see a tiger. So I'm stressed out once a week when I run into a tiger. Now we have all of these chronic stressors. So grades at the end of the semester, mortgage at the end of the month. I'm worried about dating and I'm worried about my ex. Should I break up? Should I not break up? Like, I don't really know what to do. My family is stressing out. So we have all of these chronic stressors. And as we saw that cortisol actually travels to the reticular activating system, which is where our sleep signals come from, and actually inhibits us from falling asleep. So as we see a rise in chronic stress, we are seeing chronic sleeplessness, okay? Because the brain is not able to fall asleep because our brain thinks we're in danger, so it's not going to let us fall asleep or get restful sleep. So this is where we need to manage our stress. And I know that in and of itself is a huge task, but this is kind of what my point is about sleep, is if you want to fix your sleep schedule, everyone thinks that fixing your sleep schedule is where you start, right? Everyone thinks, oh my God, like, I need to fix my sleep schedule because I'm going to bed at a crazy time. I'm waking up at a crazy time. Nothing is consistent. So I can't fix my relationships. I can't study. I can't do work. I can't do anything. I can't exercise because my sleep schedule is screwed up. Everyone thinks things start with the sleep schedule, but things don't start with the sleep schedule. Sleep schedule is the final thing. So this is what's really crazy. And this is what I've seen with most of my patients. Everyone tries to tackle sleep first, but you can't tackle sleep first. Sleep is the last thing that you actually tackle because what we need to do is fix all of these signals. We need to fix all of the circumstances, all of the biological and neurochemical signals that induce sleep. Once we do all of those things, then sleep will come very easily. And this is exactly why it's so hard to fix, because we're trying to do the last thing first. You don't start at the finish line, right? You have to run the whole race before you get to the finish line. So this is something that's very important to understand. We must manage our stress. So we've talked about some of the things that we've already kind of given you all the answers to do that, right? So if you start doing a little bit more work during the day, if you start meditating, if you start walking and managing your emotions, if you start journaling, if you start exercising, if you start eating healthy in the right way, your stress will naturally come down. We've covered stress relief in so many other places across the channel, so definitely check that stuff out. But as long as you are stressed out, it will be difficult to sleep. So let's end with one final thing. So one last tip that I would give y'all is waking up when you're tired is easier neuroscientifically than going to bed when you're not. So the biggest mistake that a lot of people make is that sleep is not about going to bed on time. It is about waking up on time or even waking up very early. So the last tip that I'm going to give y'all is that you should wake up sometime between 4 a.m. and 7 a.m. 7 a.m. is the late end of when you should wake up. Now, why is this? The first is that we have something called a circadian rhythm, which is our body's biological clock. And we actually have a very high level of cortisol early in the morning. So medically, when we're trying to test whether someone has a cortisol deficiency or a cortisol tumor or something like that, we will actually have to do this lab test. We have to do it at 7 a.m. Why is that? It's because we know that there is a biological peak of cortisol early in the morning. So why do we want to wake up around that time? So the first thing is if we wake up around that time, our ability to work will be easier because we naturally have a high level of cortisol, which means we will be activated. Our body will be in a stressful state. It doesn't feel stressful because it's first thing in the morning. That's the beautiful thing, but it allows us to focus and really complete tasks. So what we really want to do is wake up around 5:30 in the morning. Okay, you're going to be groggy. That's okay. Don't drink coffee right away, but you can have coffee or tea or whatever. Do whatever you need to wake up early. And then we want to get to work right away. The first 4 hours of the day, wake up at 5 a.m. and work until 9 o'clock. If you do this, so many things will get better. Your brain will be like, okay, we've gotten all of the work that we need to do in the day. Like you'll be crazy. It's crazy how productive you will be in the morning. Now, some people will say, but I'm not a morning person. I'm a night owl. So in my experience, a lot of night owls aren't actually night owls. They're very early morning people. Right? So their windows of work that start around midnight or whatever, like that's actually okay. You can wake up at 2 a.m., no big deal. A lot of monasteries and ashrams will have people wake up around midnight. So if you look at matins, which I think is a Catholic ceremony, they actually wake up at midnight. They go to bed at like 6 p.m., 5 p.m., and they actually wake up at midnight. That's actually totally fine. You want to wake up super early and get some stuff done. You're going to have this cortisol peak, which will help you do the work. If you want to caffeinate, go ahead and caffeinate. Have a really solid breakfast around 9. And then here's where the really important thing comes in. When you're feeling tired, you don't go to sleep. right? So then you have to stay up until whatever your natural bedtime is, 6 p.m., 7 p.m., 8 p.m., I don't care. You can fall asleep at any time between 6 and 10 p.m. Don't stay up past your inhibition window, right? So if we get that frontal lobe fatigue, then you're going to be in trouble. Try to avoid caffeine after noon. Ideally, avoid caffeine after 10 a.m. So what we want to do, it's going to be a real struggle. But if you can sort of readapt to this schedule, which is sort of biologically, there's millions of years of evolution that are supporting you in doing this, you'll be really good. So you want to wake up early. And then the other thing to consider is that we want to observe dawn and observe dusk. Okay? So when we observe dawn, it sends all these signals to our brain that, hey, it's like time to wake up. And then when we observe dusk, it's like our brain is closing the book, right? So kind of like opening the book and closing the book. As we observe dusk, so you want to be outside or at least have access to a window during dawn and dusk. This will send a lot of positive beneficial signals to your brain and your body that it's time for bed. Millions of years of evolution will be supporting you. And if we look at the problem in sleep schedules, the problem in sleep schedules is that in our society today, we have gotten rid of all of the things that induce sleep. Right? We stay in this room, these four walls. We're not in tune with the sun. We sleep at any random time. We wake at any random time. We eat at any random time. We suppress our emotions. We don't do our work. We procrastinate all the time. We have such good tools for procrastination. We miss this fatigue window where you're actually capable of going to sleep. We add an extra 75 minutes of procrastination time. So everything we're doing is not aligned with actually sleeping. All of the functions of sleep are not things that we're doing. We don't exercise. We don't use our body. And so our brain and our body utilize sleep to fix all of these things. And if we don't do all of those things, no wonder it is difficult to sleep. So fixing your sleep schedule is about understanding, why do we sleep? What is the function of sleep? And then leaning into that function. The more that you do the things that sleep is designed to compensate for, the stronger the biological signals that will allow you to sleep. Now, the last point is technology, right? So if y'all haven't figured it out, you must regulate your technology use. But this becomes way easier when you do everything else. So absolutely avoid your cell phone before you go to bed. Recognize that if you have any access to a technological device for 1 hour in your sleep window, it will be longer than an hour. You'll miss that window and you're SOL. So wake up early, eat solidly, do some work, exercise. Then you're saying, but Dr. K, I have to transform my life. Absolutely. If you transform your life, sleep will come easily. And this is what I've seen in 90% of my patients, right? Is that as we start fixing their life, now sleep becomes natural. It becomes easy. I used to struggle so much going to sleep in my 20s. It's so easy for me to sleep now. I hit the pillow and done. And this is what I've seen in most of my patients, and you can do it too. You just must have the right kind of life for the right kind of sleep. And if you want to sleep a full night, then you have to have a life that demands that you sleep a full night. So give this a shot, and I can't guarantee that it'll work, but I've seen it very consistently, and you'll be amazed at how well it works.